Thank you. I'm going to do a little stage meeting. Hey, everybody. I can't just be. I got to sit and look at you. Hey, Peter. Right. It's great to see you. We're actually friends through other stuff, and we won't have to bring any of that up. But you're apparently one of the great gladiators in the drug industry, and so I'm interested in why you are tackling this. You have an act that you've introduced called the Fast Generics Act. What are you trying to do? What's the deficit you're trying to solve?
Well, it's really about affordability. I mean, there's two things. First of all, our drug industry has done extraordinary things to extend life and to alleviate pain. And in fact, I have a personal experience. My first wife, Joan, had cancer, was given a diagnosis, or that it would be 6 months to a year. She had 9 really good years, and medication made a difference in that. So that's tremendous. And biosimilars and biologics are really going to be an important next step in providing that pain relief and that life extension. But there's an ongoing challenge with pharmaceuticals in general, and it's the cost. And of course, we in this country pay the highest cost, and at a certain point, if the price is going to be really punitive to the taxpayers, to employers who are providing health insurance for their folks, and of course for copays and deductibles that individuals pay. So how do we get the balance in making these breakthroughs where you've got to do what you can to have a policy that fosters innovation, but not let there be overreach by the producers and manufacturers, so that it makes it really almost impossible for people to afford them or for taxpayers to sustain it.
So your wife had cancer, her life was extended through medication. I assume cost became an issue that you were sensitive to.
Well, it's a while ago. I was sensitive to it, but my point here is this, that we have to be encouraging breakthroughs in medication, and pharma does that. Biologics and now biosimilars, which can help bring down the cost, it's kind of the generic version, is something that makes it affordable and sustainable. If you have a breakthrough drug, but the cost is so out of reach you can't afford it, then the life you save and possibility, you're going to kill folks with the price. So the Fast Generics Act that we're working on, Dave McKinley and I, is really about trying to make certain that the biologics industry has an opportunity to get the product that they need in order to reverse engineer when in effect, exclusivity period runs out. So that has the potential to save billions and billions of dollars for consumers and taxpayers, and have it be done in a way where you're not shortchanging the original inventor of that biologic. So that's the goal here.
So what is that tension? Because as I really see, right now the period of exclusivity is 12 years, and there's been some debate about lowering that to 7 years. In the TPP trade deal, if we had kind of proceeded with that, it would have been 7 years, as I understand it. But it's a fascinating tension between the sort of pharma industries and the biosimilar industries in the sense that they both need each other, in a sense that the biosimilar industry needs a healthy drug flow, if you will, and on the other hand, for the country and for everything else, for cost and for what's appropriate in the ecosystem. So where does that equilibrium need to be between the two industries? Because essentially I think what we're talking about is putting a ladder up to the existing drug or biologic, getting the data, the research that would allow the biosimilars to come along, and the more data, the more research they have, the more safe these products will be.
That's right.
So I'm interested in where that equilibrium needs to be between the two.
Well, I think there's got to be rules of the road that are strictly enforced. So, for instance, if a inventor, the company that came up with the biologic has a 12-year exclusivity period, then that is what the exclusivity period should be. Now, can they use various devices to try to extend that beyond what the 12-year exclusivity period is? Well, they do that. You know, if you're a biologic company and you're trying to do your research to have this, the biologic be an alternative to the biosimilar at a better price, you have a right to do that. So if there are obstacles that are put in your way to get the product in order for you to do the research and then be ready to go on the market on 12 years plus 1 day, then that's an obstacle. Now, the law does provide that 12 years exclusivity, so that's pretty generous in terms of patent. You know, with non-biologics or biologics, it's 7 years. So that patent protection is a big deal. And it is set to make certain that there is an opportunity for the company that invents this to get a solid return on its investment. And you know what? It's got to be tempting if you're sitting on a patent that's bringing in you a lot of money, and it's good for your shareholders, to say, you know, a few more years might not be a bad idea. So if you're that company, you like it. But I think where the balance is that we've got to strictly enforce the opportunity for the biologics industry to be on the market at the moment that exclusivity period occurs.
Do you favor going from 12 years to 7 years?
Well, I do. I think that 12 years is long. And I got to tell you, you know, I'm concerned about the price. And today, when we return, we're going to be in the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I'm going to be sponsoring an amendment there that's controversial. It's about allowing prescription drugs to be imported from Canada. And it would only be from FDA-approved.
So you're for anything that knocks the price down?
Well, it's not anything, because
supporting the industries elsewhere.
Bottom line here, the safety and soundness has to be addressed. Okay, so that's not negotiable. But we have an enormous opportunity here to use the pharmaceutical industry to do what I said at the beginning, is to extend lives and to alleviate pain. That is a really, really good thing. But there has to be some acknowledgement that the taxpayer, the individual with copays and deductibles, is got to be part of the equation here. All right, it's got to be sustainable, and we've got a model in this country where the main argument for the high prices is that it allows for innovation. Now, there's some truth to that, and we've got to maintain the capacity to invest in research and development. But a lot of times that is used as an argument when it really is concealing other things. And you have everything from the mainline companies that are doing hundreds of millions of dollars of research and coming up with breakthrough products. That's fantastic. Let's keep it going. But you also have other situations where essentially Wall Street, you know, practices, and this is the Martin Shkreli thing, where literally they see a product that has been, where the patents run out. It's $15 is what the price of the product was that Shkreli bought, and he saw that company having, in effect, a monopoly on that market, and he increased the price to $1,500. Now, that was legal. All right, that was legal. Is it right? Well, I think all of us know it isn't. So there's got to be some governmental role here to protect the consumer against overreach. And there's always, when you bring this up, some apprehension that will go too far. But we haven't gone anywhere. So the prices that people pay and the taxpayer pays in this country, as we all know, are the highest in the world.
You know, Peter, if I may, you know, this whole ecosystem of the various players, you know, when we talk about, hey, there's a truth on this side, there's a truth on this side, you know, I understand the importance of the ecosystem of having both innovation and research, and then having generics or biosimilars come in and kind of, you know, looking at the market and how to get it right. But what I'm surprised by is the amount of, I guess, the lack of clarity. So if you talk about pricing, right, one of the things we've been learning about because of EpiPen, Martin Shkreli, is it's not all the drug price. Like if you could get biosimilars down 50, you know, to drop the price on something 15 to 20%, you may have PBMs, you may have other issues with, you know, distribution, you may have a lot of other pricing factors. And so what it leads you to is you've got to kind of look at the whole darn ecosystem. And this town doesn't seem to want to do that. Well, and I'm interested in why that is. What would help when, you know, when Donald Trump came out and kind of blasted the pharmaceutical industries for high drug prices? You're talking about supporting Canadian imports. How can we get a greater clarity, a greater kind of holistic treatment of that drug industry?
Two things. You know, I met Elijah Cummings, and I met with President Trump, and he was very explicit about wanting to bring down the price and thought they were way too high.
How'd that go?
And it went pretty well, actually. I mean, we'll see what happens, okay? But it went pretty well. And he also talked on the campaign trail and to Elijah and me about importation done safely. But bottom line here, what you just asked shows how there is this pricing system that is totally opaque. So on EpiPen, for instance, the head of EpiPen was in our committee, and she was explaining how basically
Heather Bresch, right?
Heather Bresch, and if you listen to her at the end of the testimony, you started feeling sorry for Mylan because they were going broke selling EpiPens. And literally, she went through this long, convoluted deal, and at the end of it, she showed that the amount we get is very, very little, and the amount the PBMs and others get and the discounts was very, very high. So I'm just kind of scratching my head as I'm listening to this, thinking, look, I produce the EpiPen, I own the EpiPen, and I'm selling the EpiPen in a way where everybody else along the line is making way more than I am, and it's my pen. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, so you need some transparency about that. And on EpiPen, by the way, that Mylan, which by the way has a wonderful facility in Vermont, that company is headquartered in the Netherlands. And if you buy the EpiPen here, it's $600. If you buy it in the Netherlands, it's $100. So the lack of transparency and clarity becomes a way to just avoid, you know, the normal function of the market because there's a lack of competition. So anything about transparency is important, and this whole PBM mechanism that we have is complicating things.
So is there any hope that we'll get kind of a greater purview of some of this? I happen to know one of the reasons why Mylan was one of the companies that went through inversion and moved from sort of Pittsburgh to the Netherlands is that Teva was trying to buy them, an Israeli drug company that hadn't paid taxes for 10 years. So you know, they had a tax waiver, tax holiday from Israel for a certain. So when you kind of look at this, you sort of realize that it's constantly filled with non-market, I don't know, wobbliness in this. And so when you kind of look at trying to get the market healthy and look at some of the, it's just one of these questions I'm wondering whether or not Congress is a responsible player in that process.
Here's what happens if you're asking the nub of the question: is there a role that government has to play to get the benefit of innovation and research and some protection for consumers against the almost monopoly pricing power that exists in the industry? My view is that unless government plays some constructive role, then you're going to constantly have the tendency towards higher and higher prices and anti-competitive activities. I mean, our generic manufacturers do tremendous good in helping bring prices down. Now the biosimilars industry, you have such an opportunity to help get these new medications out to people and provide that competition. What's a proper role for government? It's always been on something like this exclusivity period. There's an acknowledgement here that if you do the investment, then you're going to get a benefit of that return. But not forever, because that's essentially a monopoly pricing power situation you have. So what you need on the part of the owner of that, the company, is some restraint. You know, they've got to get a decent return, but, you know, not too much.
Have you looked at Europe? I was just listening to Chip, who announced that they just had another biosimilar approved. So 5 approved, 2 on the market. Is that right? Right. Have you looked at Europe to sort of see? I don't know what the data is, how many products are on the market, how they've done, how's safety been? Well, has that been part of your purview?
It has to some extent, but in Europe, the government does do like price negotiation. You know, in the U.S., our VA program, they are a big purchaser of medications, and they buy wholesale, and they pay wholesale.
So
they
they're
negotiate.
All single payer, basically.
Yeah, but you're buying 100 units of aspirin when you go in the store and you look, and you're expecting that you're going to get a better price per unit than if you buy the package with 10, okay? The VA is a big buyer. In our Medicare program, which is the biggest purchaser of drugs, we made it illegal to have our Medicare program negotiate bulk price discounts. I don't think that makes much sense. And Europe doesn't do that.
One of the critiques of the industry on biosimilars is safety, and that these aren't exact drugs. They're copied drugs. They're ways to kind of come in, complex compounds doing this. So I guess in the experience of Europe, how have they met the safety test?
Well, it's similar to what we're trying to do here. I mean, one of the ways we can get, number one, we've got to guarantee safety as best as we humanly can. Number two, what we've got to have is an FDA that has adequate funding. So the biosimilars user fee agreement is extremely important, and the industry supports that, where you're going to have adequate capacity to do timely testing to guarantee that it is safe. With biosimilars, it's a little different.
Is the Trump budget friendly to that objective?
Is it friendly to any objective?
Keeping the FDA funded at the level it needs. Yeah, there you go. That's a tweetable moment. Is Scott Gottlieb friend or foe?
Friend. He can be good. You know, I got to tell you, I think one of the two areas where the president's been speaking on things where I know a lot of us would be very supportive of prescription, trying to get the price of prescription drugs down in infrastructure. And Scott Gottlieb has a pretty solid reputation. So I'm hopeful that he's going to be there playing a constructive role. You know, one of the things that's holding us back here is this whole argument about whether government does or doesn't have a role. Well, of course it has a role. There's always an apprehension that we may go too far, and that's a fair concern. But there is evidence that if government doesn't play an appropriate role, industry at times can go way too far. And there's got, at the end of the day, to be an understanding that where we're paying the highest prescription drug prices in the world, and part of it is because of anti-competitive practices, stopping companies that are want to come out with biosimilars to be able to get the access to the product they need in order to do the work that must be done. That's not right. And that's where government and our agencies have to play a constructive role to help unleash the power of this industry.
Peter, before I grab a question or two from the audience, when you're in the congressional gym and you're working out with somebody, you've gone down there not because you really want to work out, but you want to.
Credit for working out and liking
yeah,
this.
you want to seduce somebody from the dark side. Or who is the enemy of the progress you're seeking? Who are the big players that you think need to be brought over to help you achieve what you're trying to do with the Fast Generic Act? Who are the opponents?
Well, you know, the question that you're asking actually is what's bedeviling the Congress. You know, we're not functioning. You know, that's a news flash, all right? But a lot of it has to do with what I was just saying, Steve. We're just on we're on our separate sides, and we're just banging away at each other, where there's some acknowledgement, you know, some of my, on any issue, but it's on this as well. There's a lot of my Republican colleagues who are concerned about the cost of drugs, but think that really all it would take, or main thing it would take, basically is to make the FDA approve things faster. And that could be part of it. You know, if we're getting slowed down at the FDA, we want to get them as fast as we can, as long as at the end of the day, safety is guaranteed. But there are other issues where it does take governmental action, let's say price negotiation, or let's say rigorous enforcement of the period of exclusivity, but not one day more. That involves governmental action, and a lot of my colleagues are so hesitant about that role of government that they oppose it. And we don't just sit down, like you did in the old days, and try to come up with reasonable steps that take us one step further. And, you know, the bottom line here, too, is that if you own that exclusivity period, a lot of the companies that have tried to extend it through ways that are sketchy, all right? And that's not acceptable.
Is there a biosimilars caucus? There is.
Yep.
In Congress.
Over here.
You look, yeah, okay, well, that's interesting. Well, we won't go there now. Let me open to the floor. Questions, comments? Yes, right here in the front. I think it's Nicholas, if my eyes are working.
Hi, Nick Florco with Inside Health Policy.
Yes.
I was wondering, your bill, the Fast Generics Act, you already mentioned that you're going to support a Canadian importation amendment for user fees, correct? And I'm wondering, is there any attaching it to user fees, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if there's any hope of getting the Fast Generics Act included in the UFAs, either in committee or on the floor. And second of all, I'm wondering the steps that Scott Gottlieb laid out recently to increase generic competition, namely publishing a list of off-patent generic drugs and having a meeting on REMS of uses. Do you think that's enough to really encourage generic competition, or do more stringent enforcement mechanisms like your bill, are those needed?
Great questions.
Two things. I think it's unlikely we'd be able to get this bill, that bill added to the UFA legislation. I'm not sure that it's germane, but I don't see that happening. And there's a desire to get that UFA bill passed because we all need that. Number two, I think we need the Fast Generics Act. I really do. I think that it would provide some funding and some teeth and ultimately some savings. But I think it would be really important to get the potential of our biologics industry boosted. And third, I'm really happy with what Scott Gottlieb is proposing, and it's a start, but it's not the end.
Interesting. Other quick question. Yeah, right here in the back.
Hi, Steve Knievel from Public Citizen. I wanted to thank you, Representative Welch, for your leadership in the Fast Generics Act, as well as being a co-sponsor of the Improving Access to Affordable Prescription Drugs Act. And I wanted to ask you, like you mentioned, President Trump spoke on the campaign trail and since becoming president about the need for Medicare to negotiate prescription drug prices. Why don't you think he's moved in that direction so far, and what do you think civil society and members of Congress can do to move him in that direction?
Do? Thank you.
Well, I don't know why the president hasn't moved on that. When we met with him, what I said to the president, because he was very explicit that he favored that and knowledgeable about it, okay? I said, you're going to run into a wall of opposition on your side. Tom Price was sitting next to me, and I looked over to him, and I said, Tom. So there's opposition there. The other thing is the president's busy guy with other things that weren't necessarily on the agenda. So I actually think that takes away some time and attention from a lot of things that he'd like to work on. So that may be an issue. But I got to be hopeful here, all right? I think the president, when he spoke to us in his campaign and afterwards, spoke with clarity about this, number one. Number two, I think he gets the politics of this. Keep in mind, we're sitting here in Washington. People desperately need these medications. All right? They need them. They know they need them, and they appreciate what the industry is doing to create them. But if you kill folks with the price, it just creates this existential anxiety for people. It's real. And, when you're in Congress and you're going home, and I have Vermonters who cannot figure out how they're going to afford it, but they can cross the border into Canada and then get it and afford it, there's such relief. So we've got to understand that this burden on our individuals, our neighbors, and our taxpayers, the budgets of states, that's real. And we've got to try to just be reasonable on it. So we're going to keep banging away. And I know a lot of my Republican colleagues feel this. Dave McKinley is from West Virginia, coal country, and I went down there into a coal mine with him. But his folks, they're no different than Vermonters. And they know they need this. It's the hardest one. It's like a parent and for a child, or a husband for a wife, and your partner. So that's real. And we've got to just make that front and center our concern.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for your time and for your seriousness, for being with us and talking with us today. Good luck with your hearing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Peter Welch, thank you very much.